Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Cowan. I'm the Dean of the Annenberg School for Communication, and we are most proud to continue our wonderful At Annenberg series, which this week had as a guest earlier in the week Tony Giddens, the director of the London School of Economics, and continues today with an equally prominent and international figure. To introduce him, it is my particular pleasure to introduce one of my colleagues who used to be known as Professor Dutton, but is now known as Mr. President Dutton, since for this year he is the President of the Academic Senate, with whom we are co-hosting this event. So to introduce our speaker today, Professor and Mr. President Bill Dutton.
I wonder when my year's up if they'll stop calling me President. I want to thank you very much, Jeff. I'm as anxious as everyone here to hear about Manuel Castells' next book, which is on the Internet and the Network Society. And so I will be very brief so that we can get exactly to that. But I do, it's my pleasure I want to thank Jeff Cowan and the Annenberg School for Communication for arranging that we can do this lecture within the At Annenberg series and supporting this. Patty Riley was also at the School of Communication, also chipped in to make this possible. And in addition, I'd like to thank Lloyd Armstrong and the Office of the Provost, which contributes support to the Academic Senate so that we can have an Academic Senate Speakers Series. It's designed to try to find people who span disciplines, who move beyond a particular school, and to enhance the intellectual environment at the University of Southern California. So I want to thank the Senate, the Annenberg School for teaming up on this. In the 1970s, Daniel Bell published his famous work on the post-industrial society, and which later became sort of under the label of the information society, the information economy. For almost 2 decades, Daniel Bell's concept of an information society dominated academic debate and criticism of what kind of society and economy we are experiencing. Much academic criticism was basically criticism of Bell, but there were not very many alternative frameworks posed. During the 70s and 80s, Manuel Castells was actively working on conceptualizing the impacts of information and communication technologies on the geography of our society. He wrote a number of interesting pieces on world cities and the way in which major regional centers were becoming actually more important in the information age. So he was beginning to develop concepts of the geography of the information age. And most recently in the 90s, he's actually, I think, put forward a positive framework that's an alternative to Bell, that's probably done more than any other single work to reposition academic debate about the age we're living in. So his trilogy, The Information Age, is redefined the way we're discussing what the impact of information and communication technologies are on our society. The Network Society. His next book, by the way, I learned today, I should have known this, but I didn't, but the trilogy has a new edition, so if you've got the trilogy on the information age on your bookshelf, don't worry if your students haven't returned your copy of that they've borrowed, because it's actually out in a new edition, and I hope you which is updated to the Internet. But his next book is called The Internet and the Network Society, and we're very happy to have him here to speak about that. He will be able to speak for about an hour, and then for half an hour we're going to allot for questions and discussion. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Bill, for your kind words, and I thank you and the school, the Annenberg School of Communication, and the university for this distinction of inviting me to share some of my current research and thoughts with you. I hope that we'll have the possibility to have at least some kind of interaction and for this I will try to keep the time within the hour, although I will try at the same time to be specific in terms of the material I want to cover, to really correspond to your interest with a real lecture about what I'm currently working on, which is the relationship between Internet and the emergence of a new social structure, which I conceptualize as the network society. But today I will start from the side of the technology and from the Internet, not in the technological terms, but in terms of the social and cultural understanding of the Internet. I would consider the Internet at this point to be a key medium which interacts with the entire society. In its recent form, that is in its incarnation as on the basis of the World Wide Web, is a very recent phenomenon, basically in 1994, and yet we don't need to introduce it in terms of defining what it is. That's a change. I would say that the Internet at this point it's becoming an instrument of global communication. I was reminding students just a while ago that the first survey of Internet users that I knew as a rigorous survey concerned mainly the United States, but overall in the world in 1995 was estimated there were 9 million Internet users. We are today at about 350 million. BinSurf projects for 2001, mid or fall of 2001, 700 million. And using search projection to 2007 in terms of the increase in hosts and also some current estimates, my own estimate is by 2007, and probably before that, as a conservative estimate, we'll reach about 2 billion people, users of Internet in the planet. At that point, therefore, about 1/3 of the planet's population, with rates of penetration of about 75% in advanced societies. So certainly the access and uses are uneven, and diffusion of access does not mean the same thing for everybody and for every activity, but it does mean, these projections, which seem to be relatively serious, that Internet is the central communication medium of our society within this decade at worldwide. So Internet is everywhere. We do everything with the Internet. Still, we are submerged with pop interpretations about what is the Internet, what is going to be, what is not going to be. Futurologists are making a killing by selling irresponsible statements about what is the Internet. There is a whole media hype, which I think is a great subject for media researchers, but not a great source for researchers of the media. And in that sense, I think it's absolutely critical what you are doing in this school, which some of us are doing somewhere else, which is to try to start building knowledge and scholarly knowledge on what actually is the interaction between Internet, economy, society, and culture. Because otherwise we may be walking at fast speed in a society which is new and in which we walk blindly. I think that's a very serious problem. On the other hand, we do know something about the Internet. It's not like we are totally ignorant. And my lecture today will try to build on what we know. That is, I will try in this lecture to provide an overview in 9 different points of some of the information and knowledge that we have on a comparative basis on what is the interaction between the internet and the major processes in our society. Because of the broad overview character of the lecture, will necessarily be schematic, and I ask your benevolence on that matter in advance. Maybe I could clarify some matters in the discussion, and if not, hopefully in the book I am finishing. Let me first start with a quick survey of the lessons that we can learn from the history of the internet. I'm not going to go over the history of the internet. There are some very good books, actually 2 good books on the matter, so I will not go beyond that, but I want to extract the lessons. First lesson: the internet came out from the unlikely intersection between 2 cultures: the scientific culture, the big science culture, and the countercultural communal culture, the hackers culture. Then it was later on developed and publicized throughout society through the entrepreneurial culture, but that was the 1990s. Look, I didn't mention what everybody mentions, the military culture, right? Because it didn't come from the military culture. It was nurtured in the Defense Department, but in one of the most extraordinary adventures in history, as you know. DARPA was the home of the internet, the research agency of the Defense Department in the United States, but the internet was not a military operation. Yes, it developed on the basis of a concept by Paul Barron at Rand Corporation, and also, in fact, Donald Davis in Britain was working in parallel on the architecture of communication, a concept by Barron that wanted, as you know, to build a system of communications able to survive a nuclear strike. This is the story everybody tells. The story that people don't tell is that this project by Barron was rejected by the Defense Department. So it was not that what was being done in internet. So in fact, computer scientists captured the research money of the Defense Department to do their thing. And they did that, according to Cerf and other people to whom I have talked to, simply taking advantage of 2 things. Anything that was technology in the Cold War would be immediately funded on the notion of national security. Everything that would counteract the Soviet Sputnik. Second, the Congress never understood a thing about what they were doing. So the key actors were not the military, were the old boys network between research universities, NSF, think tanks like RAND, BBN, DARPA, etc., etc. That was one hand. The other hand was the grassroots culture that developed from the late 1970s onwards through the Usenet network, and on the other hand, the PC-based network like FidoNet and others, the Unix culture, cooperative networks that interacted with the internet people, and actually the physical interaction and the scientific interaction took place at Berkeley, which was at the same time was one of the few points in which, on the one hand, there was a strong Unix users group, and at the same time an ARPANET node, and that facilitated the interconnection. Anyway, this is one first lesson. The cultural roots of the internet are rooted in meritocracy, academic research, free communication, and libertarian culture linked to the grassroots and the hackers. And in fact, the 2 cultures interacted where? In the university world. That's where they interacted. The professors used to work for DARPA, and the students used to work for the professors, and at the same time being hackers on their own. So this is quite unique, and I think it's an important lesson. Second lesson from the history of the internet. Internet developed very late, until 1995 in fact, not from business, but from a combination of public money and voluntary work. And particularly, remember the one anecdote that tells the whole story. In 1972, when ARPANET was already operational, the Defense Department tried to give it, not sell it, just give it to AT&T. That after considering for quite a while carefully, the proposal decided that that was not commercial and could never be a success, and why to care about such exotic technology. So the business world turned down the internet until the early 1990s. So you see, sometimes the notion of business as the source of innovation, yes and no. The source of innovation in the application, but internet would not have existed out from the business world. Came out not from the government either, but from this very strange animal, which is the university world relating to the grassroots libertarian culture. Third, critical matter in the history of internet is the openness of the network architecture, the technical openness of the network architecture. The fact that the TCP/IP protocols of the 1973-75 period designed by Serve and others, and CAN particularly, they were absolutely critical in terms of their architecture because it accommodated a multi-layer structure that allowed the internet protocols, the ARPANET protocols in the origin, to integrate other protocols from other systems in the world. So the openness of the technological architecture made possible the incorporation of standards and protocols of communication that created truly a global tool of communication, in spite of the institutional and technological differences that were in fact the rule rather than the exception in the world. Fourth lesson, the users of internet were all the time the producers of the technology. All over history, in most technologies, users are producers, are the ones who really produce the technology in their final form. However, in the internet was much more than in any other technology. Why? Because of the high-speed interactivity and the feedback capacity of the internet. By using the internet, the users produced, example, to always try, email. The email was not really an application that was in the cards of the internet. Email today, email was always the most used application, and is still 80% of the applications of the use of the internet today is email. Now, what happened is that this group of scientists, which controlled ARPANET, remember what they wanted to do, what they really wanted to do, not what they were telling the Defense Department they were doing. What they really wanted to do was to have computer sharing capability in order to have more computing time, to share computing. Now, the issue here is that they finally discovered they had more computing time they would ever need. So what else they could do? They started to do other things, and one of the things they started to use the email technology that was created by Tomlinson at BBN in 1970, and that became the real killer application in the internet world, and they use it for all kinds of things. The fastest use in the ARPANET network, I'm talking the Defense Department, were the science fiction lovers network. That was the first major application of internet. Other people also said that marijuana procurement was a big use in that network as well. All this is in the papers and in the history of the internet. Fifth lesson, internet was from the beginning multicultural and international in terms of networking. And this is something that, particularly in Europe, people forget all the time. As usual, some old American left has decided that the internet is another weapon of American imperialism, and therefore internet is American. Well, no, internet partly was American, of course, in ARPANET, but the grassroots network of internet starting in the late 1970s was, on the contrary, international, precisely because the grassroots networking could not work so well through the ARPANET, because that was still a Defense Department secluded network. More than that, even from the very beginning, the technology of internet was an international collaborative project. Davis was absolutely critical in the packet switching technology development in Britain, although Baran and Davis never understood each other, and only later they met each other. The TCP/IP protocols were co-designed by Cerf, Kahn, Metcalfe, and also the French group of Cyclades with Gérard Leland. And of course, without going too much into the matter, remember that of course the World Wide Web was developed at CERN by Tim Berners-Lee and Roger Caillou. To a large extent, the European contribution, I wouldn't say the universal contribution, but the European contribution to Internet was critical, and the grassroots networking development of Internet that throughout the 1980s provided new applications and new expressions like the built-in boards, like chat rooms, conference rooms, all this was the grassroots international network that created it. Sixth, Internet also, in terms of its history, provides an extraordinary lesson in self-regulation and actual difficulty of government control. People don't pay too much attention to the institutional history of Internet, but it's quite extraordinary. It's the key medium in the world was managed and governed, and still is by and large, by completely ad hoc institutions, theoretically under control of the US government, but in practice not, like the Internet Society, like the Internet Task Force, like the Internet Engineering Task Force, which were in fact a group of gentlemen, they were not ladies, a group of gentlemen actually trusted by the community at large and trying to be fair to each other. I mean, it's a kind of all-gentry club. And it worked in the most unlikely situation, leading toward the current process, as you know, these weeks ICANN, the Internet government, is being elected throughout the world in one extraordinary process of 250,000 people voting online electronically for the candidacies. I'm not saying, I don't buy entirely the myth of global democracy, that because we know that there are influences and there are pressure groups and name recognition, but ICANN, the authority, the international authority of Internet, is being elected through a process uncontrolled by any government and through a process of whoever wants to present, to organize, to decide in a quite an extraordinary example of libertarian utopia. Things will certainly get more nasty later on, but still the history of the Internet is an extraordinary example of the ability of society to self-organize and make it work. And then final lesson about the history of the Internet, which I think is important, is the whole thing about open source. We talk about Linux now as the key frontier. I do believe that the open source movement is redefining the relationship between property and wealth creation. It happens that we are suddenly seeing that the absence of proprietary rights stimulates innovation, totally contradicting the traditional business theory, while at the same time it also can create wealth through the private appropriation of applications and innovation in business terms, which is not exactly the same thing as innovation in software. And in that sense, Microsoft is dead, not because of the State Department, not because of the Commerce Department and the Justice Department pressures on Microsoft, but because of the end of the Microsoft model. However, I wouldn't say that Microsoft as a corporation is dead, because it's migrating, as one says in the Internet world, rapidly toward the open source model. So Bill Gates will be all right, but the Microsoft model will be dead. Now, but we all talk about this open source model, but we forget that the Internet has always been based on absolutely open source. TCP and TCP/IP were open codes, were open protocols. The World Wide Web, of course, which is a server program, was open from the very beginning. Mosaic was open. Netscape, they gave away even the source code in 1998. So the entire notion, and today, remember that over 2/3 of World Wide Web servers in the world are run by Apache, which is an open source program. All right? So think about it. What means that the key central medium of communication in our world is open source. Then, having recanted briefly the main lessons of the history of the Internet for one analytical purpose, which is the social production of a given technology, which is the history of a technology, actually shapes the technology. The technology could go in very different ways. It just happened that the way this particular technology was produced leads to the number of features that I mentioned, which are absolutely critical for understanding of the entire interaction between Internet, economy, and society. Let's now move into this interaction. I will start with the economy. I will start with the notion of the transformation of the business world by the Internet and with the Internet. And here, maybe it's important to remember that the greatest expansion of the uses of the Internet is taking place, has taken place, is taking place, and will take place in the business world. While we were preoccupied in the academic world discussing if we would use Internet to reconstruct, deconstruct, or construct our identities, the business world just took Internet and transformed itself and the world with it. So it doesn't come as a surprise that in a society in which the creation of wealth is a business process, a private business process, well, this is where the Internet really blossomed. So if you take today Internet applications, take any of the surveys, over 80% of the uses of Internet are instrumental. Instrumental is not necessarily business, are instrumental in terms of what people do with the Internet. They do things for themselves. They don't spend their time chatting. Teenagers do, but people at large. But teenagers do this all the time anyway, with or without Internet. But fundamentally, Internet is a tool of work and a tool of fulfillment of your interests, tasks, projects, decisions, what really matters to you. So in the business world, Internet has had an extraordinary impact. Let me summarize, which is a huge issue, in three precise terms. First of all, e-business is essentially a business tool rather than a consumer's tool. Statistically, 82% of commercial transactions over the Internet are B2B, not B2C. Okay? Business-to-business transactions, Forrester Research projects by 2004 to account business transactions online account for about the equivalent of 1/4 of US GDP in the United States. Okay? Well, that's considerable. But much more important than the quantitative change is the qualitative change. The entire business world is being retooled in order to use the Internet, converting itself into internet networks linked to through networks to other businesses which form together a network of networks. In other words, the business world has become a giant network, powered and tooled by the Internet. This is the fundamental transformation. So the notion here is that while online companies are interesting, and in fact they invented the model, so they are innovators in the business world, it's not the .com companies which really express the deep transformation of the Internet. It's the entire business world, it's the entire economy. This distinction between old economy and new economy doesn't make sense in historical terms. It's very much like the distinction that one could do by the end of the 19th century between the artisan economy and the electrified economy that would become the large corporation. It's just a matter of time. In a world in which you can move with internet, with the internet networking capacity, and at the speed of the internet, it's just a matter of time that you have only two kind of companies, internet-based companies and dead companies. Now, if you look in global terms, you will have something else, which is informal economy surviving subsistence activities, which is a different matter. By the way, some of them also use the internet. But fundamentally, is the internet becomes the electricity of the information age, and therefore you cannot work without internet as you could not work without electricity in the industrial era. This I can multiply, and if you want in the debate I can give you examples of all kind of sectors. I started years ago proposing as my key example Cisco Systems, because it's the pure network company. Well, I got lucky in terms of not my stock. Unfortunately, I didn't buy. I never trust myself. But in terms of my prediction, it became the largest market capitalization value company in the world at one point, and now it's the second after General Electric. And Cisco is purely a network company in which, in fact, 90% of the transactions are done online on the website. But lately I have changed my examples. Lately, my greatest late example is Zara. Zara is a Spanish clothing company, pret-a-porter, which is the biggest, fastest competitor to Gap. Zara at this point has 2,001 stores in 34 countries. It's a fashion company, mid-price, mid-level, and the whole thing is on the internet. From the moment you buy something at Zara, your information goes into a handheld device in the store seller, who then is processed every day at the level of the manager, is sent to the headquarters in La Coruña, from all places in northwestern Spain, in a traditional and relatively poor region, in which the whole process is then transformed into a computerized design that goes into the machines of the factory. Through all this process, Zara is able to produce 12,000 new designs per year and have a total cycle of the product from design to the store in 2 weeks. Gap overtook Benetton by cutting from 6 months to 2 months the cycle. Zara is cutting in 2 weeks. This is internet speed. I'm waiting for a Chinese company to do it in 1 week. I know they're going to do it. That's my point. That's my example. So first thing, what has been transformed is the business model, not the dot-com companies. Second transformation, capital markets. Internet has transformed capital, and that's absolutely essential, because capital is the center of our economy and of the global economy. On the one hand, capital has transformed the internet, because it's only through venture capital that you can have the kind of innovative companies. Even Cisco in 1984 had to be, first of all, funded by Sequoia Capital. In other words, venture capital is at the source of the new economy. And venture capital operates on the basis of the ability of the market to recognize innovation and give a value to this innovation at internet speed. I explain this now. So in other words, the whole argument is not completed here. Venture capital is essential, but venture capital is able to invest in the internet because the way capital valuation operates now, which depends on the internet. That's a positive feedback loop on both sides. So I have to explain how valuation operates. First of all, in order to understand how valuation operates, and this is a very important thing for you or your parents, because all your money depends on that, because all your money is there, two things in which the internet is important. First of all, the global capital markets had become globally interconnected. This is not, strictly speaking, internet, because they are not internet protocols, but it's a network of computer networks, okay? Anyway, so don't call it internet technically, but it's a network of computer networks which is behind the globalization of capital markets. Second, therefore, you have interdependence and multiple sources of investment and rapid change from one value to another in this global market. Second, internet has made possible the development of electronic communication networks, ECNs, as the very basis of new stock trading, and not only stock, all kind of securities. So why this is important? Why the transaction, the electronic transaction, the technology of the transaction matters? Well, first of all, it brings down transaction cost so dramatically that many more people can do it. Second, the speed is much greater. Third, you can mobilize savings from anywhere to anywhere. So the size and therefore the complexity is much greater. If you point all these things together, you have much greater volatility as a systemic feature of the market. Then, how the market operates in terms of valuation, and then, meaning, are all these dot companies overvalued, undervalued? Well, they are both. They are undervalued and overvalued. And let me explain. The market, the current process of valuation operates on the basis of information turbulences from all sources. Some of them are economic criteria. Some of them are simply psychological moods. Greenspan or Duisenberg have a problem with their women, with their wives, or with their men at breakfast in the morning, and then they have a problem. We have a problem. Or if a political event or someone says something. In other words, information turbulences in a highly volatile market amplify and diffuse market trends. Look, we published a book recently with one of your speakers, Giddens, and other people like Soros and Paul Volcker, etc., in London this year on global capitalism. And there, in this book, there is a wonderful chapter by Paul Volcker, former president of the Federal Reserve Bank, former chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States. Volcker there analyzes the financial markets and concludes, and I cite literally, in fact, today's financial markets operate not only on objective economic criteria, but on perception. And he adds, in fact, to be more precise, perception is the reality. Because yes, in terms of productivity in terms of the economy, productivity is the key. Yes, in terms of the firm, profitability is the key. But in terms of the investor calculates in terms of the return. Therefore, growth of value of stocks is what really counts. That's what really counts. How the value of stocks is generated is a more complicated process. And I certainly think that profits and sound management and productivity, all these things count. I'm just saying not only that. There is a series of other factors that combine in a random pattern, which ultimately yield a judgment of the market on each particular stock or security at each particular time, which is what actually drives the economy. Because it's what the market decides that is value is what is value. Sorry, it's like this in this society. Maybe I don't like it, but what the financial market says your value is, that's what your value is, period. And if you don't want, change planet. Or blow up the planet, which is also an interesting alternative sometimes. But the key point here is that the process through which valuation is performed has become highly randomized and complexified by global volatility, gigantic size, processed at optoelectronic speed with a multiplicity of signals which have to be reacted to. Now, this matter about information turbulences, in fact, is not new. I mean, the markets always had been submitted to it. What is new? Internet. Log into Whisper.com tonight, and you will see Whisper.com gives you the latest gossip on every possible company every day, and there are hundreds of Whisper.com. So these information turbulences had been amplified at the internet size, and any of these sources go into some process of decision making, and then the process is triggered. That's why some companies are undervalued, others are overvalued, but what is systemic is volatility. And this means that we are not in a bubble, because a bubble refers to a notion of market equilibrium in which we go into a bubble, the bubble bursts, and we go back to still water, pure, pristine lake water in which we don't move, and that's the market equilibrium, and we restart our sound calculations again. We are out of the craziness of the bubble. Well, but what we are observing systemically is, in the last 10 years, and increasingly so, is bubbles form, burst, reform, right? That's what we are observing. So, such a system, I don't call it a bubble, I call it a sparkling water. So we live in a sparkling water economy rather than in a bubble economy. Because the market is able to create this valuation on the basis of image, is then that you can have the internet startups able to sell an idea, just an idea, to venture capital, to then have venture capital selling an IPO into the market, then get the real money from the market, then use the real money to buy real talent, and to start doing something that then goes back to the market and hopefully is bought by someone so that you go into a bigger project, and so on and so on. About 9 out of 10 of these projects fail, but the one that wins usually wins big, and that's what is moving our process of innovation and creative destruction today. Third point in which internet changes the new economy and the business world concerns labor, concerns the transformation of labor. This is of course a huge topic, and I just give you the headlines. First transformation, everything depends on talent. Highly skilled labor is the source, the most important source, the most important capital for any company today in any aspect of the economy. But not everybody is highly skilled in the world. Of course, the majority of people are not. What counts there, therefore, is the division increasingly in the labor force in the countries and in the world in two major categories of labor. The one I call not high skilled but self-programmable. Why? Because the notion of high skilled labor refers to a very static notion of a skill. The critical thing today in our world, in our economy, is not to have skills, but to have the skill to acquire skills, to learn to learn. And in that sense, it's also internet speed. To learn, the information is in the internet, but you need the mental capacity to move along all your life. Sorry, never rest. That's self-programmable labor. Together with that, the majority of people in the world are generic labor. That is labor that simply executes decisions from others and coexists in a world with machines and with people are equally generic from distant locations in poorer economies. And which combination between on-site generic labor, distant generic labor, and machines is a pure business calculation here and there that is made on an ad hoc basis. Second major element in the transformation of labor is a complete change in the labor relationships characterized by the rise of flexibility as the form of employment and individualization of management labor relationships. Everybody consultant of everybody, right? I consult you, you consult me. So the whole notion of network is linked to a notion of extreme flexibility, extreme individualization of labor relationships. Just to give you one empirical illustration of this, the survey of representative sample of California workers by UCSF and the Field Institute showed that if we define traditional employment as a year-round job with a contract, full-time, for a full-time employer, that is what used to be a job, right? And which still for most of us in academia is still the definition of job. Well, California labor force at this point, only 33% of people fit that pattern. And if we add the notion of and all these plus 3 years at least in the company or in your job, 3 years, then it falls to 22%. So since women in fact are the key for flexibility, I used to say that the organization man is out, the flexible woman is in. And this is totally related to the networking capacity, which is mediated and permeated by the internet. What about society? What about social relationships? Here is one of the most ideologically charged debates on the internet. We are bombarded with images and notions that internet isolates, alienates, makes people unhappy. You spend your time online looking for pornography and then you go out and kill. Or else you fake your identity so much that you fake and refake and you don't know who you are. And finally you are nothing but a composite of identities that talk to each other through you. Well, what do we know empirically? There are a number of people, and by the way, there is a great review of all the available literature coming up in the next annual review of sociology by Professor Paul DiMaggio from Princeton that summarizes all this information. But let's take simply the systematic empirical work done for years by Barry Wellman and his collaborators at the University of Toronto. What we know, something that in fact is common sense, but we know it empirically, we know with solid data. We know that virtual communities can be communities, but simply they are different of physical communities. So there are different patterns of sociability. They don't replace physical community, they are different. There are other types of community, there are other networks of sociability. What both communities, physical and virtual, experiment is a transformation of the general pattern of sociability in our society, which does not have much to do with the internet. Internet expresses it as physical communities and physical interaction express it. This is the following. What is a decline of sociability rooted either in the workplace or in the territory, and a growing importance of sociability built on the basis of personal networks, linked to affinities, linked to interests, linked to your capacity to self-select the person with whom you want to relate. I mean, all this is not extraordinarily complicated and sounds reasonable to most of us. That's what researchers observe. Now, what the emergent form of sociability, therefore, is personal communities. Communities linked to the affinities and interests of individuals. Individually centered communities, which other people call networks. Now, what researchers have shown is that one individual social network is made usually in America, in North America, from, including Canada, from somewhere between, on average, half a dozen intimate ties and hundreds of weak ties. Now, if we look from that perspective, what Wellman and his collaborators find is that the internet is very bad at creating strong ties. You don't marry over the internet, as you do is your problem. It is very good at creating weak ties and excellent at sustaining strong ties that had been created outside the internet. Why it's good for weak ties is because the whole problem in terms of developing weak ties is a trade-off in terms of time and energy between what you could do otherwise and then the energy you spend in that weak tie. Well, the internet allows you to simply chat a little bit or exchange some information or say hello to someone without making a major effort and still keep it. So in that sense, what we observe is the development of a sociability of variable geometry which always combines physical interaction and online interaction. Now, the latest data by Wellman on an in-depth study on the Toronto suburbs seem to show that there is a cumulative sociability pattern in which the more you are sociable, the more you use internet, and the more you have offline interaction with more people. It's a cumulative pattern, not an alternative pattern of sociability. Most of the studies show that when people go intensely online, they take time out from other activities. Which one? Obvious. Television. Television. So since on average people only talk to their family members about something like 30 minutes per day in America, I mean, they cannot cut more on that time. So it's not that internet is killing the family, that the family is quite transformed, not to say other stronger word, and therefore the internet cannot do more there. I mean, it's already at the minimal expression. So internet takes from other activities which are kind of individualized activities. It's true that part of the television viewing used to be a family activity, but this is studies that you know in the media world, but remember, these are the 1980s. Now everybody has a television in the room, right? So, or they have something else. So what happens, in fact, is that this notion of the television being the family earth, that's really what is changing. But changed before the internet. Fundamentally, in terms of the uses of internet, what we found is that chat rooms and identity games, on which so much ink and time has been spent, are very interesting, fascinating experiences, but it's a very tiny minority of the uses of internet, and is heavily concentrated in the teenagers, which again, identity games had been the typical teenage activity because they're looking for their identity. They have to place themselves in the world. They still don't know who they are, and therefore they are experimenting different things. I am this, I am that, what happens to me it would be that, and that's why it's perfect for identity games, and internet is very good to express these identity games. But it's not what people do in the internet. Marcia Lipman in Berkeley has studied hundreds of virtual communities, hundreds, and she has found two things: that over 2/3 of these communities are task-oriented, instrumental-oriented. Second, that in addition, the most successful community, you can actually predict the success of a community to keep on going by how instrumental it is. The more task-oriented, the more successful, the more durable. In other words, looks like the internet is doing very much, I mean, we are doing with internet very much like what people in this country, at least in the early 20th century, did with the telephone, according to the wonderful history of the telephone research by Claude Fisher, in terms of people just took the telephone and completely changed it in different terms, in different patterns, vis-a-vis what was expected the telephone to be. So people are doing with the internet what they want to do with the internet, not what the internet wants them to do, okay? Since the internet, in fact, is a very flexible tool that can be turned around, is one of the most flexible technologies in that sense. The interesting thing is that yes, chat rooms develop, yes, social interaction develop, but around communities which are built on specific interests. For instance, one of the most successful series of chat rooms developed on SeniorNet, the Senior Citizen Network, which is also a supportive network, which is also an information source, which is also a political organizing source, all kind of things, and then you chat. Okay? So, sorry, no great game, no great identity faking. It's a serious matter. Internet is serious. And no one can see more serious how is the internet that by looking at what's happening in the realm of social movements. Used to be that the internet was the instrument of corporate capitalism. And look, suddenly the internet is the actual organizing tool and propaganda machine against Seattle, against the IMF, against the World Bank, etc. So social movements have taken the internet and they have used the internet to change themselves very deeply. All social movements these days are using the internet massively. Is after business, the second largest use of the internet in proportion, because people who are in the social movements are a minority, but in terms of the density of penetration is social movements. Very few social movements do not use the internet. But how this relates to the overall dynamics of social movements? What is the specific internet contribution to the transformation of social movements? 3 factors. First of all, because there is a crisis of structured organizations and political parties as instruments of representation and mobilization, there is an emergence of loose coalitions as forms of mobilization. Networks become main social actors of mobilization and protest, and therefore internet is critical, is the adequate tool for these networks as actors of mobilization. Second, social movements in the information age are increasingly organized around cultural codes, not just identity, values in general, environmentalism, women's equality and self-expression, human rights. Social movements in the information age are primarily cultural movements. And because they are primarily cultural movements, a tool of communication or cultural expression becomes the critical weapon. Third, increasingly power functions in global networks. And movements are in fact locally rooted. And what happens in today's social movements and politics is that the old maxim has been shown to be completely wrong. Remember, think global, act local? Well, if you act local and the power is global, you are out. So it's in fact the opposite. You think local, that is, you think in terms of your context, who you are, your identity, your interest, who is around you. You organize local, and then you act global, because it's globally where things matter. And that's exactly what social movements are doing through the internet. They are organizing locally and connecting globally and landing in Seattle from time to time. And that connection between the local and the global, that constant interaction between the local and the global is exactly what the internet is good at doing. On the other hand, internet could have been an extraordinary instrument for the transformation of politics, and yet, in a sense that it would have been a tool, it could have been a tool of opening up citizen participation, political information. Imagine a truly democratic government, a great internet system of interaction in which you can examine the data from your government anytime, anywhere. Politicians would be online talking with you in real time, not only on election day. The whole system of participation could be really implemented as a democratic tool. And in fact, that's what the futurologists always told us would happen, that we would all be in a complete electronic aura, everybody debating, everybody informed, everybody voting all the time, in real time, globally. Well, nothing of this. The actual observation. We're talking with Bill Dutton about, and what I believe is an excellent book that he contributed to on Parliament and the Internet, a series of case studies of all parliaments in many countries putting themselves online. Well, this book and many other similar studies show that clearly what the political system has done is to use Internet as a big advertising board. They just post the information and just wait. And if you say something, some consultant will analyze which are the trends and how to do the next publicity campaign. There is absolutely no example at the national politics of an interactive system of effective political participation. There are some in the world at the local level, but bad news. They are declining rapidly. I used to give example, hyperbole in Bologna, down. My most beloved example, the digital city of Amsterdam, right? Everybody knows that wonderful example. Closed this week. Digital city has been closed because there was absolutely no participation, no relationship. The whole thing was mediatized. It still remains as a foundation or something, but is not at all a system of political participation anymore, and so on. So, in other words, Internet has not survived the inability of political systems to open themselves up. It's not the technology that could open politics. So, it's a symptom of the times that while Internet has become an absolutely critical tool in self-organization, social mobilization, and social movements, is for the time being, I don't want to be dogmatic forever, for the time being has not transformed the practice of participatory democracy and political information. So do governments relate to the Internet? Well, yes. Mainly they relate trying to control it. And this is another huge area of inquiry and interest. I had the honor and the interesting experience of being in the European Commission Information Society experts group appointed in 1995-97 to inform the European Union about what would be the European Information Society. And I went through a terrible experience, in fact, because I realized that the only interest of government representatives in that committee, there were experts on the one hand and government representatives formally or informally on the other hand. Their only interest was how to control Internet. And particularly the French government was going crazy about it because Mitterrand's memoirs, Mitterrand's doctor memoirs about Mitterrand were published in France, showing all kinds of bad things about Mitterrand, and the government and the courts, under the instigation of Mitterrand's family, had forbidden the publication and diffusion of the book. Of course, the following day it was on the Internet, and the whole of France read it. And the French representative said, we must, from this committee, must have very precise regulations about how to avoid that Internet continues to pose a challenge to national sovereignty. That was the most important problem for the French government, for the European Union, for the Singapore government, for the Chinese government, and guess what? For the American government too. The whole thing about child pornography has always been a scapegoat to try to actually control information, because states all over history had been based on the control of information. If you don't control information, very difficult for a state to really become a sovereign entity. Well, there are bad news in that sense for the governments. There's still a long debate about is technically possible, not technically possible to control Internet. I think it's difficult, let's put it this way. Not entirely impossible. It's possible to, very easy, to go to the guy who connected to that particular website and shoot him. Well, that's easy. It's a rough method, but it works. That's what some governments do. But it's much more difficult to actually fine-tune the control. But it is something much more important. Because the US court protection of freedom of expression in the Internet, the whole question is metaphysical. Because the US Internet is not going to be government censored and controlled, and therefore the global Internet cannot be. than by technical reasons. The only way is not to be connected to the US internet, which means not to be connected to the internet, right? The other thing also in that sense of the bad news for government is that some researchers in Singapore, which is the epitome of government control, have just finished a study showing how in fact people are resisting government censorship in Singapore, and how in fact Singapore internet is much, much freer than what people think these days. So even in Singapore, things are not that clear. On the other hand, there is control over the internet through the internet. Which kind of control? Is our privacy. Our privacy has ended. This we know. So when people always talk to me about how bad is Big Brother, say, got it wrong. It's not Big Brother, it's Little Sisters. It's the hundreds, thousands of commercial companies which are bombarding you every day, putting cookies in your internet system, and they know everything about us. They absolutely know. Scott McNeely was very blunt but very honest when saying privacy in the internet, forget it, get over it. There's no privacy in the internet, period. Can be government regulations, which are in Europe, not in the United States, to protect privacy and punish some people who do bad things with your data when you don't want. The latest two things, remember, last year this big thing about double-click, connecting the database with real names so that you give your all information for free. And the very latest thing, the political marketing over the internet, this Aristotle system that has compiled potential voting profile records on 155 million American citizens, and they are selling it to any candidate for any office in the United States. Then I would say the almost an anarchist provocation, but it's more serious than that. This latest event about selling votes over the internet, the latest .com is selling absentee ballots over the internet, that actual votes that will count. There's a whole system. I don't want to explain you because I don't want to cooperate with the enterprise. There was some investigation of the US government about it. Guess what? 2 days ago, this voteselling.com has moved its domain to Germany. So you still can sell it. You just have to process through Germany. But the vote counts in the United States. So these kind of things. The real threat in terms of liberties is not from the government to the internet, but from the internet commercial interest toward our privacy. And then let me finish with a note on something that you know very well in this school, and I simply want to emphasize. The relationship between internet and the transformation of media and of communication. Again, schematic headlines. First of all, there is business convergence between internet and the media world. Multimedia conglomerates are taking position in different industries. However, this business convergence doesn't always work very well, because still in a network economy, people do well what they know what to do, and clearly what's happening, for instance, between ABC and Disney on the one hand, and Time Warner and AOL on the other hand, is not showing great promise in terms of the effectiveness. However, I would say when they learn to network better, the multimedia conglomerates are likely to be dominant both in the internet communication industry and in the multimedia communication industry. However, the technological convergence is much less clear. And this, I would like some discussion if you want. There is possible, as you know, to broadcast TV over the internet. But first, who wants it? Who really wants to have TV over the internet? And second, the actual, the ability to broadcast TV over the internet would require an increase in bandwidth which of such level that is unforeseeable in the United States in the next 10 years. So that's not the issue. When people talk about web TV, remember web TV is a furniture. You have web and TV in the same furniture. That's what web TV is. The only company that really is trying to do the trick is Microsoft, trying to put everything in a box for obvious reasons. Then they will sell the software of the multimedia world. The world, in fact, is moving rather toward technological diversification between different media systems, then controlled and managed by the internet, but with different media expressions. Transformation of the print media, absolutely. There is a major transformation going on, but not what people think the end of the newspapers, the end of the print media. A year ago, I participated in a panel with, invited by the, in the convention of the American newspaper editors. They made one of the main panels of the convention, something which they opposed me to a whole group of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, .com companies of all these new startups and the big ones too, Yahoo, etc. And these poor newspaper editors were being terrified, actually abused by the Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, saying you are out, in 5 years you all will be dead, all be online, no problem. Since that panel, I have a special fan club in the newspaper editors, because I responded with a very simple question. All this is very, well, the material expression doesn't matter. I mean, you have Los Angeles Times online, offline, in a book, in a disc, whatever you want. That's not the issue. The issue is how you really produce the content. How you distribute the content depends. And will be all at the same time, all the forms of expression. But who is going to believe what you read online or offline? Where is the source of credibility? So the critical matter in the news world is credibility. So how you build credibility is not by surfing the internet, getting the latest gossip. Because even if you get the right information, you don't believe it. Because you have every possible thing on the internet. So those who build credibility are those who actually count in the media world, in the news. I mean in the news, not in the entertainment. And maybe LA Times, New York Times, Chicago Tribune have all their problems in the world, but still they are more credible than any gossip in the internet, right? So credibility is crucial, and this means branding, and branding is linked to established publication. So in fact it's the contrary. In this world of huge amounts of information is in fact the credibility of the media linked to fundamental brand names in journalism, which becomes the critical matter. What is really transforming the internet is something that Bill Dutton told me he's actually researching these days, and some of my former students are also doing, which is the transformation of the newsroom in the model which I call Chicago Tribune, LA Times, which is this on time, in real time, continuing news production, in which is multimedia expression and an integrated newsroom which never stops, in which informations come and processed and are constantly updated, rewritten, reanalyzed in real time. This is the real transformation, and this is internet. This is internet in terms of the input, in terms of the processing, and in terms of the diffusion. And that's a fundamental transformation with, in addition, the ability of all these newsrooms to link up globally. The real transformation that internet brings to the media world is because of its capacity to integrate the entire system of expression of multimedia. It creates a diversified, comprehensive electronic hypertext that, because it's customized, segmented, and specific, rather than mass media and standardized, because it's so flexible, so adaptable, is much more able to integrate everything. So the essential, most of the expressions, our cultural expressions, our information, our communication systems are all being integrated in this interactive electronic hypertext. That's what I call the culture of real virtuality. Not virtual reality, because virtual reality always existed. Reality was always codified through symbols. The culture of real virtuality, because the key to everything we do, to everything we perceive, we communicate, we interact with, is in this hypertext, in this electronic hypertext, which is virtual. So this virtuality is our reality, and Internet processes this. And I finish. Internet, therefore, is society. It expresses social processes, social interests, social values, and social institutions. What is then the social specificity of Internet if it is just society? So it's society, but how Internet makes this society specific? Well, the specificity is that Internet is the material foundation of the network society produced by the interaction of new information technology and the historically produced social matrix. By network society, I understand precisely, which I never defined, by the way, in my book, The Network Society, a society whose social structure is constructed around electronically powered information communication networks. And by social structure, I understand the organizational arrangements of humans in relationships of production and consumption, experience and power, is expressed in meaningful interaction by culture. So Internet is not just a technology, it is the communication medium that constitutes the organizational form of all societies in the information age. You want a parallel, not a metaphor, but a historical parallel. In the industrial age, we could say that the key energy, steam power and then electricity. Electricity was the energy, was able to be distributed, decentralized through the electrical engine, and this made possible the factory as the center of the organization, which made possible the large corporation. In the information age, the key technological change and the key technology is information technology, which is distributed by the Internet as the electrical engine of our age, which makes possible the network as the new organizational form. So in that sense, Internet is not simply a technology. It's a fundamental socio-organizational medium that processes virtuality into our reality. Therefore, to manage and to change our reality requires acting in and by the Internet. That is, it requires that we understand its language, its logic, its constraints, and its freedoms. And this, I'm afraid, is our task. Thanks for your attention.
We have time for a few questions. Their mic.
I do not hate Microsoft, but I like your idea that the Microsoft model is dying. However, at the same time, we can see that Microsoft model is not the only thing that's dying. And another thing we discussed a lot recently is the MP3 model. If you want to, can you comment on that? And to say it's like this cross-file between the hackers, the sharing and community model and with the commercial world. Can you comment on that? Do you think the MP3 model is also dying, and will it die before or after the Microsoft model?
Which kind of...
Yeah, sure.
Let me go there. Let me understand. You are talking about business model. You mean the .com companies kind of model?
The MP3 is the sharing the people, like especially college students.
Yeah.
It's especially among college students, people share CD those songs, and there was an article on Atlantic Monthly last month.
No, I understand this here. I just wanted to know. I mean, you mean Napster, etc. I just wanted to know. You mean about the business model or the fact that you will be able to exchange files over the internet and distribute music without the copyright? That's what you mean?
No, because when people exchange MP3 files, it's not that they're not making money out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not a business model. It's an exchange model.
Exactly. So this, if that's what you mean, this model is not dying, it's expanding. On the contrary, I think more and more people use the internet to exchange use value rather than money. They also use it to exchange money. But the level, you see, what I would call a barter economy, but even more interesting, just use value, people are doing it massively these days. And the internet allows this model to develop. Now, that's why I asked you the question about if you meant the business. In terms of the making a business out of it, this is what is not going to work. Because you cannot be at the same time using the use value model and making money out of it. Legally, you will not be able to do it, and also in the culture, people who use the use value don't want at the same time to be exploited by the other. So the bottom line about having a use value exchange system is that it's use value, not that you are fooled by someone else. Okay? So in that sense, I would say the business model is collapsing as much as the Microsoft model. The social model is expanding.
Thank you.
Why don't you take that question?
If you have mic, I think I can stay here and you can have two mics, because it's simply for me to listen, but if you have mic, I rather don't follow the Hollywood style.
Why don't you go ahead? But you're in L.A.
Manuel, one of the very interesting aspects of your talk talked about participatory democracy in a way it might be developing, the way the state might be controlling things or helping things along. One thing that you did not deal with too much, and you've dealt with extensively in one of the volumes, is the question of corruption. And I'm wondering if you could expand a little bit more on that, because all that you're talking about today is certainly an update of all that stuff that you've been writing in the past. But at the same time, the internet and other means of information technology is enabling a high degree of criminal activity across the world. And that seems to me to be at least as important as everything else that you've talked about. And I wondered if you could perhaps tell us more about what your thinking in this line is now.
Thank you. Well, this is certainly a very, very important question. As you know, much of my political analysis in my trilogy developed this theme. I was heavily criticized by it, and for that reason, and I like to explain. So there are three things here, if you were to need to be a little bit systematic. First of all, corruption is a systemic trend in political systems. But now, in addition, most politics in all countries in the last 10, 15 years had been dominated by corruption-related scandals. I don't think that this is because we are more corrupt than ever. I see no particular reason why we should be more corrupt than ever. I actually went into, for my book, there is actually an encyclopedia of political corruption, believe it or not, Longman's encyclopedia. And I did some statistics on that matter, and no, I mean, reported corruption goes up and down in the last century, as one would expect. So I think two things are happening. Maybe some accentuation, some upward trend in the last 20 years, linked to the financing of politics. And financing is really connected to the need to do media politics. Media, as you know, in this school are very expensive. And since if you are not in the media, you are not in politics, to do media politics is extremely expensive and is completely in contradiction with the so-called standard systems of political financing, here and in Europe and everywhere else. So just stating that parties, assuming that they are honest, but they cannot be honest. Structurally, they have to be dishonest. Structurally, they have to find sources of financing, and that the current system is not in the genes of humankind. I'm saying under the current system in any country I know, Parties need extra money that cannot be obtained through the normal means, and therefore they have to do something else. And this something else opens the line to corruption. But more important than that is, because of media politics, the most important political weapon these days is, in positive terms, personality, attractive personalities. Nobody reads the platforms of political parties. People more or less follow the electoral debates and so on, but in the electoral debates, except some very basic ideological things, people say the same. I will save Social Security. No, I will save Social Security. Then you have to go into the fine-grained calculations of projections of federal budget deficit under a world econometric model in 20 years. But the standard line is, I will save Social Security. So therefore, what really counts is how the person who says, I will save Social Security, says so, and how much you trust this person, which becomes a personality matter. So in positive terms, personalization of politics is a general rule, as you know. Media experts have been working on this for years in all countries. On a negative trend, therefore, the most effective political weapon is character assassination. Negative messages are 5 times more efficient than positive messages. So if I say, look how wonderful is this guy, and I go and I destroy the reputation of this guy with information leaked to the press, then you win. Because the other one maybe is not as attractive, but is not so dirty. And this has been systematic in what I call scandal politics. Now, scandal politics, therefore, creates an image, but not only that, exposes the reality and creates an image, both about the politics of corruption and the corruption of politics. So in that sense, when I wrote my trilogy, some people started to say, well, you really exaggerate when you say it's all the countries in the world. Unfortunately, sometimes I have insider information that I cannot write, because anything that is not in the public domain and scholarly research, I don't write about it. But I knew some things, for instance, about Germany. And then suddenly, I didn't know about Kohl himself, okay? But I knew about some things going on in Germany. Then now suddenly Germany, the country that everybody said, no, but everybody but Germany. The whole German political system has been wrecked by this matter. If what seems to be the case, according to several French and German media, is that the reason why Kohl doesn't want to talk is because, in fact, he actually was bought by Mitterrand to join the euro and kill the beloved Deutschmark in exchange of French support for German reunification. It's true that the revelation of such thing could wreck Europe, could wreck the European Union. That's why I think Kohl is being very responsible and refusing to talk about something that could be absolutely explosive. This information, of course, has been broadcast in the French and German media, so I'm not revealing anything. I'm saying if this would be the case. So what we have observed is that information and of all kinds has become the critical weapon in politics, usually linked to scandals and corruption. Now, you put internet on top of this, and then you see the extraordinary velocity and the inability to control any kind of information in internet. However, with credibility. That's why I say the whole thing about credibility is absolutely essential. But remember what happened, your media people here, remember what happened with the beginning of the Monica Lewinsky affair. Newsweek had the information, but retained the information and checked with the White House. In the meantime, one of your Los Angelinos from his home in one-person news agency just diffused the information and had enough credibility in terms of the details that they started the whole process. So in other words, the internet makes much more difficult to control the diffusion of information of various origins. And since most of the origins of the information is from the interested parts in the political system, it's not journalists. Come on, I mean, all these great movies about investigative journalism. Investigative journalists, remember the greatest movie on this, is about Deep Throat, right? It's Deep Throat who starts the process. So the political system is full of deep throats, providing ammunition to all kind of journalists to do their job, which is to report in what they learn. And that's, in my opinion, the most central political system, the political event in politics today. And this is amplified and speeded up by the internet.
We might have time for one brief.
I'll final
Sorry.
First, a quick thanks for this book.
Thank you.
The Rise of the Network Society. I use this as a brilliant rhetorical weapon all the time. It's just a good brickbat to conceptualize and bring people together towards something that's really important. And if you hadn't put that title on that book, that's important. Now, this has been a very instrumental talk today about the internet, how we must, the using of the internet for tools, and how business is taking it over. Let me, sometimes in the midst of all this, when we talk about the global flows, you mention the currency and the products. You also mention the flow of information, but you also mention the flow of cultural information, which is different. And I'll try to bring this down smallly. Last night I talked to Aaron Sorkin, who writes The West Wing, and had a discussion because he gives us a portrait of politics that apparently works, but he's still mired a little bit in reality. What Roberta Unger at Harvard says is the beauty of what we can do in art is we can transcend the reality that is and take a look at possibilities. And if we'll link this to Anthony Giddens earlier in the week, who says that risk is a thing that we must face. And it's the thing that's really defeating Tony Blair, is that as he starts to lose steam, people are afraid to try real things in the works of imagination. Perhaps we can try them there and vote on those imaginary works there so that we can get a feel for what we're really debating. So that's my poetical input into your wonderful work that you've done. Thank you.
Thank you for your interesting comment, and I really appreciate your esteem. Let me say something serious about your point, because really it's important. When I say instrumentality, it's really the expression of people's task and purpose, which doesn't mean just business or just politics. I am reacting on the basis of my observation and the observation of most internet researchers to this notion that internet is a world of fantasy. For instance, I'm reacting against the famous New Yorker's cartoon that everybody cites in the internet. No one knows that you are a dog, right? And there are two dogs typing, internet nowhere. Well, if you really believe that, you are in trouble. Because imagine that you are a social movement and you really want to call people to your cause. And you are a dog. And you say, haha, all the cats in the world come to me. Then you organize the cats. Then you're in deep trouble. So it's absolutely the contrary. Because in internet, the only thing that you can communicate is your actual purpose and intention. You will build a virtual world on the basis of the information you provide, or you will be trapped into your own fantasy. So that's what I'm reacting to. But on the other hand, it doesn't mean that art, particularly, or poetry and literature, or the personal moods that one would interpret in that way, which doesn't necessarily have to be stamped as art, are in fact, I would say, internet offers and is offering extraordinary possibilities for collective creation, for expression of different kind. Look, 3 weeks ago, I was in Barcelona in a similar talk addressing the European Congress of Institutes of Art, which were exactly trying to understand what can be the role of the internet in what we always did, that is art creation as the critical thing. And there was a consensus there that because internet is so malleable, so able to relate experience with globality, which is what art was always, right? Is I am me, and then there's a whole world, a huge world out there, how we connect. Then internet is becoming a tool for artists to be in themselves and not to be alone. While poor Picasso had to wait until he was famous, and then some art gallery would buy it so that people would talk to him. Otherwise, when he was in Barcelona, no one was really talking to him. So that's my point. Internet being an instrument of communication from the individual to the universal, and from the universal to the individual, becomes, in fact, the bridge that art or artistic-like expression always needed, and now we have.